Snow drifted through the air in thick, silent sheets, turning the city street into a blur of white and trembling light. The man in the black coat slowed when he saw the two children standing alone, near the curb, small shapes shivering against the harsh winter wind. The boy held his sister in both arms, her tiny legs dangling uselessly, her face buried in his shoulder. When the man knelt down in front of them, the boy's eyes widened with a mixture of fear and desperate hope, as if he'd been waiting for someone, anyone, to stop. The cold stung the man's skin, but he barely noticed it. All he could focus on was the way the girl's fingers clutched the boy's coat as if she'd fall apart without him. The boy swallowed hard before speaking, his voice tight and brittle. "Sir, my sister can't walk. Can we stay with you?" The words wavered in the air, fragile enough to break. Snowflakes landed on the boy's eyelashes, melting into thin streaks as he blinked fast, trying not to cry. For a moment, the man forgot the noise of honking taxis, the blur of people rushing past, the responsibilities waiting for him at his office. The world shrank to the boy's shaking hands and the little girl's trembling breaths. He saw the exhaustion carved into their tiny faces, the kind of exhaustion no child should ever know. A sharp ache pressed into his chest, unexpected and heavy. He hadn't planned to stop here today. Hadn't planned to let anything or anyone slip past the guarded walls of his routine. But the plea in the boy's voice pierced straight through him. Snowflakes clung to the children's worn, thin clothes. The girl lifted her head slightly, her lips pale, her eyes glassy with cold, and leaned toward him without hesitation. Like she trusted him immediately, like she needed someone to trust. The boy stood straighter, trying to appear strong for her sake, though his own knees were shaking. The man reached out instinctively, steadying the little girl before she could slip from her brother's arms. Her warmth, or rather the lack of it, shocked him. She felt frighteningly light, surrounded by the chaotic hum of a city that had no time for vulnerable moments. He realized he couldn't walk away. Not from these two. Not tonight. The decision hit him all at once, with urgency, with fear, with an unfamiliar but undeniable pull deep inside. The boy watched him breathlessly, waiting for an answer that might decide their entire night. Maybe their entire life. And the man felt something shift inside him, like a locked door quietly cracking open. The wind howled down the street as the man lifted the little girl into his arms, feeling how her body curled instinctively toward the warmth. The boy stayed close, almost glued to his sister's side, his small boots crunching in the thin layer of icy snow. He kept darting nervous glances around, as if afraid someone might drag them away before help reached them. The man spoke softly, trying to calm him without pushing too hard. But the boy's eyes carried too many memories for someone his age, memories that made him flinch at sudden noises and hold his breath whenever an adult moved too quickly. As they stepped into the shelter, a rush of heat enveloped them, fogging the man's glasses and loosening the stiffness from his hands. The girl's body sagged against him, her cheek resting on his shoulder, as if she could finally let go now that she wasn't freezing. The boy looked around the crowded room with a mixture of relief and shame, as though stepping into warmth felt like admitting defeat. Volunteers hurried between tables, offering steaming cups and blankets, but their voices blurred into background noise. The man set the little girl down gently on a bench. She tried to stand on instinct, but her legs buckled instantly, and she let out a tiny gasp of pain before grabbing his arm. Fear flashed across her face, fear of falling, of being a burden, of being left behind. He steadied her without hesitation, feeling a protective instinct grip him harder than expected. "Your ankle," he murmured, seeing the faint bruises beneath the grime. It wasn't fresh. It had been hurting her for days, maybe longer. The boy stiffened, guilt rushing to his expression before he could hide it. I carried her most of the time," he whispered, eyes lowering. "I didn't want her to hurt more." His voice cracked, heavy with the pressure of responsibility no child should shoulder. His hands, raw from cold, twisted together nervously. Every instinct told the man this boy had been trying to be both brother and parent, fighting a battle he was far too small for. People moved around them. Someone laughed, a phone rang. Chairs scraped, but the man heard none of it. All he saw was the boy's trembling chin, the girl leaning against him like she trusted only his body to keep her upright. He knelt again, his voice low and warm. "You did everything you could," he said. "You kept her safe." The boy blinked rapidly, trying to hide the moisture gathering in his eyes. But I couldn't keep her warm, he whispered. And I couldn't make her walk again. The man felt the words lodge deep inside him, twisting something tender that he didn't realize had been dormant for years. He reached out, placing a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder. The child didn't pull away this time. Instead, he leaned in just slightly, just enough to show he was tired of fighting alone. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, a decision began to solidify inside the man, quiet but unshakable. The girl's blanket slipped a little as she shifted, and the man pulled it back up around her, shoulders with a gentleness that surprised even him. Her tiny fingers poked out, pale and trembling, tracing the edge of the wool as if grounding herself. The boy sat beside her but kept stealing glances at the door. The volunteers, the strangers. Every movement tightened his posture, as though he feared someone might separate them at any moment. His small backpack, dirt-stained and frayed, sat at his feet like all the belongings he owned could fit inside it. The man lowered himself to their level, feeling the heat of the shelter contrast sharply with the cold dread forming in his chest. He looked at the girl's ankle, swollen, colored in fading purples and yellows, and anger flickered in him. Sharp and sudden. Not at her, not at the boy, but at the world that let children walk through a snowstorm carrying pain like this. The girl watched him silently, eyes wide and glassy, her cheeks still flushed from the cold. When he touched her ankle lightly to check it, she flinched but didn't pull away. She was used to pushing through hurt. Too used to it. Has it hurt for long? He asked softly, trying not to let his frustration bleed through. The boy swallowed hard. Since the second night, he said, voice scraping like sandpaper. I told her we'd stop if she needed, but she kept saying she was okay. She didn't want me to worry. Tears slipped down his cheek before he could catch them. He wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. The girl leaned against him, her little hand pressing to his arm as if reminding him she was still here. The boy squeezed her hand back, jaw trembling. The man felt something tighten inside him, a pull he didn't fight, not this time. He saw the boy trying so hard to be unbreakable when he was clearly falling apart inside. You're both safe now, the man said, his voice low, steady, almost too gentle for how he usually spoke. The boy's eyes flicked up, confused by the warmth. You don't have to be strong every second. The boy looked at him like he didn't trust what he heard, like adults had said comforting things. Before that didn't mean anything. But then his gaze lowered, and his shoulders slowly unclenched just a little, as if his body finally accepted he couldn't keep holding all of this alone. A volunteer approached with a cup of hot soup, but when the man shifted slightly, the boy tensed instantly, positioning himself between the girl and the stranger, protective, fierce, terrified. The volunteer understood and stepped back. The man waited until the boy's breathing steadied again. Tell me what happened, he said. Not demanding, not distant, just open. The boy hesitated, staring at the floor tiles as if the truth might crack them. But then he whispered, Mom said she'd come back. She didn't, and I didn't know where else to go. His voice fractured, each word like a piece of himself falling apart. The man felt the confession hit him with a force he wasn't ready for. Something shifted inside him, a deep, quiet certainty forming beneath the warmth of the shelter lights. He wasn't letting these kids out of his sight. Not tonight, not after this. He pulled the blanket tighter around the girl's shoulders, then shifted his attention fully to the boy. The child sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, fingers knotted together so tightly the knuckles turned white. He looked like someone bracing for bad news, someone who had learned too young that help usually came with conditions, or didn't come at all. The man softened his posture, lowering himself to eye level so the boy wouldn't feel cornered. Warm light from the shelter's ceiling lamps spilled over them, but the tension in the boy's small frame didn't ease. You're safe now, the man said quietly, and this time he meant it as a promise rather than comfort. He didn't know why the words felt so heavy in his chest, but they did. Something protective and fierce was building inside him, rising like a tide he couldn't stop. The boy's chin trembled before he clamped his jaw shut again, fighting the emotion threatening to spill out. He glanced at his sister, still curled into the bench, holding tightly to the edge of the man's coat as if afraid he might vanish. With a shaking breath, the boy turned back. Mom said she would come back for us, he murmured. She told us to wait near the bus station. His voice cracked. We waited until it got dark, then cold. And I kept thinking she'd run up any second, but she didn't. His body folded inward, a small, quiet collapse of hope. The man felt something inside him fracture. Not cleanly, not quietly, the kind of crack that left edges sharp and aching. He reached out, not grabbing, not rushing, and placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. The child froze at the touch, then slowly leaned into it, the way someone starved might press into the first warm meal they'd had in days. The girl watched them both with tired eyes before inching closer to her brother, resting her head against his arm. The man's voice was low, almost hoarse. "You did everything you could. More than most adults could." It wasn't flattery. It was truth, heavy and undeniable. The boy let out a weak breath, half sob, half relief, but no tears came. He was too exhausted for that now. Noise murmured around them, clattering dishes, soft conversations, the distant hum of the city outside. But the man barely heard any of it. All he saw were two children who had run out of options, and looked at him like he was their last one. He straightened slowly, the decision forming inside him with a clarity that startled him. Then he stood and extended his hand, not a suggestion, not a tentative offer. A quiet, solid choice. "Come with me," he said softly. "Both of you." The boy blinked in confusion as if he misheard. The man didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. He simply held out his hand, steady, unwavering. The girl was the first to respond. She reached out with her tiny fingers, placing her hand in his as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. The boy looked from her to the man, fear and hope battling in his eyes. Then slowly he slid off the bench and took the man's other hand, and in that instant the man felt something shift, an invisible lock turning, something old and buried inside him coming awake. He led them toward the exit, not back toward the cold, but toward the next part of their lives. And he knew there was no turning back now. Snow tapped softly against the shelter windows as he guided the children through the bustling room, their small hands gripping his with a fragile desperation that made his steps slow. "Careful." The boy stayed half a step behind them, as if still unsure whether he was allowed to believe any of this was real. The girl leaned into the man's side, her head heavy against his arm, her breath small and uneven. Every few seconds, she glanced up at him with quiet trust that startled him with its purity. When they reached the door, a gust of cold seeped through the cracks, making the boy tense immediately. He clutched his sister's blanket tighter around her, shoulders rising defensively. The man gently placed a steadying hand on his back. "You're not going out there alone," he said, his voice firm but warm. "You're coming with me, to my home." He didn't dress the words with explanations or promises. They stood on their own, simple, solid, real. Outside, the falling snow glowed under the streetlights, turning the night into a quiet silver world. His sleek black car waited at the curb, engine running, windows warm and fogged from the heater inside. The boy froze at the sight of it, his instinctive fear shadowing his expression. Cars meant change. Cars meant being taken away. Cars meant adults making decisions without asking. The man saw it immediately. He knelt again, lowering the girl carefully into the backseat. Wrapping her in a thicker blanket from the trunk, she melted into the warmth, her eyes fluttering. Then he turned to the boy, eye level, unthreatening, patient. "You'll sit beside her," he said gently. "You can hold her hand the whole way. I won't take her from you." The boy's throat bobbed. "You're not sending us somewhere else?" His voice was so small it nearly vanished into the wind. "No," the man answered, quiet, steady, final. "You're coming with me. I'm not leaving you two behind." The boy's breath hitched, and for a second his eyes shone with disbelief, as if he'd been holding himself apart from this moment, afraid it might disappear if he leaned in too much. Then, with a trembling exhale, he climbed into the car and pulled his sister close, tucking her head under his chin. She relaxed instantly, her body trusting his warmth. The man closed the door gently, watching the siblings huddle together, two small lives clinging to each other like they'd been surviving storms long before the snow started falling tonight. He felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest, not pity, not obligation, but a fierce protectiveness that anchored itself deep. He slid into the driver's seat, the soft hum of the heater wrapping them all in warmth. As he pulled away from the shelter, the boy whispered something he almost didn't hear. "Sir, thank you." It wasn't hesitant. It wasn't fearful. It was raw, grateful, fragile. The man didn't look back. He didn't want the boy to see the emotion in his eyes. Instead, he kept his voice steady. "You're safe now," he said. "Both of you." And as the car moved through the snow-lit streets, the children leaning together in the back seat, he knew with absolute certainty that this night had changed everything. For them, and for him. The story that began outside a shelter door was ending here, in warmth and safety and the fragile beginnings of something like family.